Hello. Hi. Hi. Hello. Hi. It's Jorbs. Welcome back to Brotato. Today, I made a first hour-long video introducing Well-Rounded, and we played SMGs, and it went great and was generally well-received. And I've had lots of people say that they'd love more strategic analysis of Brotato and the like. And I thought a sensible thing to do would just be to go to the next character. So today I want to talk about Brawler. And I'm excited to talk about Brawler because Brawler is about the least interesting character imaginable from the perspective of build variety or complexity. You are just going to use unarmed weapons because you get plus 50% attack speed with them. There aren't a great variety of those, so you're pretty much just going to use the fist. I mean, there are a few you could use, but I'm pretty much just going to use the fist. You start with a fist, so you get one fist at the start plus the starting weapon that you choose, which means you start with two fists, so you're already pretty strong. And then, you get some dodge and minus range and minus 50 ranged damage, so you will never have a ranged weapon. You're really just going to punch things with this character. There's room to do some interesting things with the build, but generally speaking, the build path for Brawler is not complex and not something that we need to talk about a huge amount, which gives me a chance to talk about something else that I do have to talk about a huge amount to tell you about playing Brawler, which is movement in this game. Because as Well-Rounded, we played with guns, which meant we could sort of just stand almost wherever we wanted, and it didn't matter that much. Our guns would be shooting, the enemies would be dying, especially when we started to snowball and get pretty strong. If I remember right, I was like trying to walk at the enemies to take damage, and I couldn't even do it because the enemies would die before I got there. That's not going to be how it feels to play Brawler, because Brawler is using melee weapons to start, and then on top of that has minus 50 range on its melee weapons, so they're melee weapons with even shorter range. And so we have to talk a little bit about how to move in order to deal damage in Brotato. So of course I made a spreadsheet. This is a tab from my Brotato 1.0 guide, which I am working on but haven't fully released yet. But I think I'll just copy paste it into my my regular sheet that I have that tracks my Brotato runs. Which, if you haven't seen it, by the way, looks like this, and you very well might enjoy reading through this. It's not finished and not intended for publication, but this is what I sort of track nonsense on when I'm just spreadsheeting about Brotato, and that'll be linked below the video. Anyway, let's talk about movement in Brotato. When I was interviewed about Brotato by Yair for The Atlantic, the internet's resident Brotato expert was me, I guess. I talked a lot with him about how the game has extremely simplistic controls. You just use the analog stick on your controller, but it has this immense depth as a strategic game below the surface. And I think you can see somewhat easily how that exists in the shopping phase, where you're thinking really hard, do I want more survivability or more damage right now, or more harvesting, or more luck? Should I reroll or should I not reroll, etc.? There are tons and tons and tons of small decisions going on there. But perhaps it's easier to overlook how much strategy there is in the actual combat phases, because they're not turn-based, perhaps? I'm not sure. I think turn-based strategy gamers see the shop phase and they're like, oh, a strategy game, but then when they look at the real-time strategy that goes on in the fighting, they may not recognize how strategic that actually is. And so I wanted to talk about just some introductory terms that I'm going to introduce as nomenclature for the game right now. These aren't communally agreed upon terms and stuff, but I think most people who play games like this would understand what you meant if you use these words for the most part. I want to just introduce these and tell you what they are and tell you why I use this sort of movement when I do. And then as I'm playing a Brawler run, I'm going to try to point out moments when I'm using these different types of movement techniques. So, okay, the first one is kiting, also called tethering or spacing. These terms mean slightly different things, but for the most part, what they mean is that you are staying at a range which allows you to deal damage while the enemy can't deal damage to you. Kiting is very common when you play a ranged character and your opponent plays a melee character in like all sorts of fighting games. You want to move backwards while shooting at them, and that's basically kiting. So kiting and tethering and spacing is extremely constant in Brotato. You want to deal damage and you don't want to be on top of the enemy so they can kill you. Most of the enemies in the game are melee, which like in the strictest sense of the term, where you actually have to collide with their model to take damage. Whereas you yourself are ranged, even when it says you have a melee weapon, your melee weapons are still ranged. They still shoot out from your character some distance. So, kiting and tethering and spacing is constant in this game, especially when you're against like elites, where the fight will be prolonged. You want to constantly be kiting them so that you're not only dodging them to not take damage from them, but you also have as much weapon uptime as possible to deal damage to them to kill them. Cool. I think that one's pretty straightforward. I think most people who have played games like this would conceptually already understand that. Next, though, centralizing. I'm not sure that many people would think that much about how important centralizing is in a game like this, but centralizing is constantly important and constantly very important in Brotato. And the idea of controlling the center of the board has always been a thing that we understand in strategy games since before I was born. It's like a thing in chess. Yeah, like I think people generally get that if you control the center of a board in a strategy game, it allows you more options to move outward in any direction, so on and so forth. But you might not think about that in Brotato, but it is a huge thing in Brotato. Centralizing means that you have 360 degrees around you that you can move into, so you're much more likely to find space to run away into if you are being threatened by an enemy. Centralizing also means that you have enemies all around you to shoot at. I'm not trapped in here with them, they're trapped in here with me sort of situation, which is good. It means that your weapons can deal more damage. The weapon on the left side of your character is further away from weapons on your right than the weapon on your right side of your character. So fairly often you're going to want the weapon on your right to be attacking an enemy to the right and the weapon on your left to be attacking an enemy to the left to maximize your damage from them. And you're not going to get that for all 6 of your weapons if you're on the side of the map. You're going to get it if you're in the center of the map, so enemies can be all around you. Centralizing also will come up even in situations where you're like forced onto the edge of the map where you're hiding from things. If there's a moment where you can jut toward the center of the map just for a little bit and you get in the habit of doing that, I think you'll be surprised at how powerful that can be just in like pulling enemies away from the edge of the map. So suddenly you have some room to keep going, or allowing you to dodge all of a sudden because all of a sudden you have some space below and above you. Or even sometimes you'll find that, oh, there's actually a way to keep going into the center of the map, and all of a sudden you're completely out of the difficult situation that you had been in previously. So centralizing is a huge deal. And if I could choose a direction to be moving in Brotato, it would always be toward the center, basically. The only reason I don't move toward the center is that I'm being forced to go somewhere else by circumstances doing so. Hopefully it's because the enemy's somewhere else so I can go kill it, but sometimes it's because I'm having to run away from tons and tons of enemies in the center of the screen, and that's a little bit scary. All right, next, sidestepping. I think we all sort of conceptually understand what sidestepping is. It means the enemy is attacking you this way, and you move that way, perpendicular to the enemy's attack. So you're not trying to run away from the enemy as it attacks you, because then you're running in a straight line in the same direction as the attack that's going at you, and you're very much likely to get hit by it anyway, depending on its speed and stuff. You can run away from attacks, but yeah, that's not in this glossary right now. Something that people maybe don't think about the value of sidestepping is that it minimizes how much you're moving, which can be very valuable for keeping control of your character and keeping control of your movement and understanding what's going on. It can be very valuable for staying centralized. If there's a particularly valuable part of the map for you to be in right now, sidestepping enemy attacks instead of like running away from them allows you to stay in that very valuable part of the map. And yeah, sidestepping is pretty common. It's timing based. You have to understand how fast the attack is coming at you and when it will come at you. And so it's something that you'll get better at with practice. And as you get better and better, and it will trivialize fights entirely. Like there are elites which are very difficult to kill the first time that you fight them because you don't understand their timing yet. And then after you've fought them 5 or 6 times, if you're practicing sidestepping them, their attack is actually the same every time. And you just have to learn how to sidestep it once. And then you can do it over and over and over again and basically fight them without taking damage. So sidestepping is very powerful. Next up, wobbling. This is nomenclature that I'm choosing because I think that every good game should have wobbling in it. When I say wobbling, what I mean is that I'm making constant small movements to dodge many incoming attacks by oscillating at a frequency which will make them always miss. Basically, I'm sidestepping over and over and over and over and over again. And so enemies which aim directly at your character model will just miss you all the time if you're doing that at the right speed. Even if there are tons and tons and tons and tons of them, they just will never successfully hit you because when you're here, they shoot at you, but then you go over here. And then the ones that shoot at you when you're over here, you go over there. If you get your wobbling frequency a little bit wrong, maybe some that shoot at you while you're in the middle, you'll like go to the bottom and then come back to the middle and then you will get hit. But if you get the frequency right, that honestly isn't really a big deal. So wobbling, if you have lots of attacks coming directed directly at your model from the same direction, kind of, it can trivialize dodging them for you. And sometimes, like, instead of walking in a straight line to where I want to go, I will wobble in a straight line toward where I want to go, with the point being that it just kind of makes everything miss me. So this is a fairly easy thing that you can do, and it can become sort of second nature, like you're not even really thinking about it at some point. It doesn't have to be a conscious thing where you're looking at the screen and responding to threats and moving in a reactionary way. This can just be an active way of moving, which makes it so you take far, far, far less damage. All right, so that's wobbling. Bullet hell. Bullet hell is not really a term for movement, but if you think like sidestepping is good when there's like one enemy and wobbling is good when there are quite a few enemies, bullet hell is a term describing a genre of games, kind of like Brotato, but like more oriented around the screen being full of projectiles that will hit and kill you. And so when I talk about Brotato feeling like a bullet hell, like wave 14, when there are lots of enemies which shoot projectiles in a random way, sometimes will feel like a bullet hell. What I mean is that sidestepping and wobbling are not enough to dodge anymore, and I'm actually having to very actively look at the screen and respond to every projectile individually to try to find paths through them which won't get me hit. And that's quite hard. It feels a lot like a rhythm game playing like that. It's really fun. I recommend it. I recommend Brotato. Brotato's a very good game. It's amazing how many different vibes you get out of a game where the only thing you do is move the joystick, but there you go. So that's what I mean by bullet hell when I say bullet hell. All right, cornering. This is sort of a counterpart to centralizing. Centralizing, you're going to the middle of the board because it lets you move in all the different directions, deal damage as quickly as possible, etc. Cornering, you're going to the corner of the board. And the reason that cornering is powerful is that there are enemies in the game who don't move toward you very aggressively or who shoot in a random direction. And by cornering, you minimize how many of those enemies you're encountering at once, basically. So it's a defensive positioning for the game. Also, by cornering, you have all of the attackers coming from the same direction, which means your AoE weapons will be constantly clearing all of the enemies which are threatening you at the same time, which is quite valuable. So cornering is quite valuable with AoE weapons. It kind of clumps the enemies more so that your weapons work a bit better. I should write that down because I don't have it written there. Oh well. Cornering is also valuable because all of the attacks coming from the same direction makes it easier to see them and react to them and dodge them sometimes, although I would argue that as you get better at the game, that becomes less useful. Like, for the first 150 hours of Brotato or something, I not only felt the need to corner to dodge attacks, but also I could only corner in the bottom right corner of the screen to do it. For some reason, perhaps because we're used to reading left to right and down in English, and so that was the corner of the screen where, like, I'm looking at the screen and seeing the projectiles and it matches how my brain processes written information or whatever. But nowadays, in situations like that, I find more and more that I can just center in the screen and see the projectiles coming in from all around me. Okay, so that's cornering. Circling. This is another sort of positional comment, although this one is more active. Circling just means rotating around the edge of the map. And this is useful when there are lots of enemies on the map and you can't get through them. Circling kind of allows them to all end up chasing you around in a circle. Circling becomes problematic when enemies spawn in front of you because you're running in a circle, there are a bunch of enemies chasing you, and then there are enemies in front of you as well, and all of a sudden, where do you go? And so escaping situations like that while circling is what the next two glossary terms are about. I will also say that circling is, like, you don't want to be circling constantly because it doesn't maximize your weapon uptime, and also it makes it really hard to pick up the materials that drop from enemies. If you're circling, then you are on the outside of the map, and the enemies are pretty much constantly on the inside of the map, and the materials that the enemies drop where they die. So if you circle for an entire wave, you will just leave a bunch of materials in the middle of the map that you don't pick up and don't get to spend in the shop. And the way that the game works, you'll get those materials the next wave, probably, but you're still being delayed on when you get to use them to buy stuff and get stronger. And that means that it's harder for you to play the next wave and then the next wave, and you're snowballing in the wrong direction at that point. So you want to avoid circling if you don't have to circle. All right, so say that you are forced to circle though, but all of a sudden enemies spawn in front of you. One thing you can do is just, like, kill the enemies and get through. That's often a thing that you'll do. But another thing that I like to do and find is very successful, I call bracketing. This is nomenclature I'm introducing, which people might not understand, but I'm not really sure what else to call this. The idea of bracketing is basically, let's say we start in the middle of the bottom of the map, we're going to the right corner, then all the way up the right side of the screen, and then we're moving somewhat in on the top of the map before we turn around again. So we're making a shape that looks like a bracket. And the point of bracketing is that we're clearing the right side of the screen as much as we possibly can. Like, we're spending as much of our time as possible walking up and down the right side of the screen, which means that it's going to be clear of enemy spawns, etc., as much as possible. However, if the map is so dense that there are still enemies chasing us, we probably can't just get to the top right corner and turn around and walk down the right side of the screen again because there will be enemies behind us. And so what we're doing is we're moving a little bit into the top of the screen to pull the enemies who are behind us after us a little bit. And then because we're a little bit faster at moving than the enemies, we can turn around and use the space that we just opened on the right side of the screen where enemies used to be standing that were chasing us. We can walk past them again and go back down the side of the screen, which we just went down, so hopefully it's clear of new spawns, etc., and we won't run into stuff in front of us. Bracketing is a very common movement path for me on horde waves, and there's a decent chance I will bracket at some point in this brawler wave or brawler run that I'm going to do, and if I do, I'll try to remember to point it out to you. It's a very powerful type of movement for situations where the screen is extremely full of enemies. It makes those situations go from feeling absolutely unsurvivable to feeling almost trivial sometimes. So if you've never tried this sort of movement, I would recommend it. All right, next, if you're circling and enemies show up in front of you, another thing you can do I call threading or finding seams. And the idea here is that even if the map is extremely densely packed with enemies, you will still be able to find space to move through packs of enemies quite often, especially if you have a little bit of speed. And doing so feels really exciting and very powerful. And it's also good because you're centralizing by threading, basically. You're going from a situation where you're forced on the edge of the board to a situation where suddenly you're running through the center of the board. And that potentially lets you do all the sorts of things that centralizing is valuable for to begin with. Threading is often movement speed based, so it's easier to do if you have more movement speed. Usually if I'm threading, I'm not going to be wobbling because I need to go in a straight line as quickly as possible, or else the enemies will collapse on me from both sides. And yeah, as you play the game, if you're looking for situations where you can find a seam and thread through the enemies, you will start to notice that they do exist. And then the final term I have here is power washing. Actually, I want to add one more, but the final term I have written right now is power washing, which is what I use to say that I can just kill all the enemies. Now I'm basically invincible. I can run at them and they can't hit me, and all I'm doing is moving toward the enemies to kill them. Often I'll sort of like power wash in like a power washing pattern, you know, going down side to side, because that's just like the way to kill all the enemies and cover the map and pick up all the materials that they're dropping. Ideally, the goal of your run is to get to a point where you are power washing. That means that you have snowballed out of control and you're strong and you will hopefully win the game. Another thing I want to add here is tanking, which means taking damage from enemies. And I think it's actually really important to point out that you can do this and sometimes you should. Sometimes it's better to take a hit or two from enemies rather than be forced into a situation where you'll take even more damage than that. Sometimes you'll be like circling and there will be enemies in front of you, and the thing you have to do is actually just run through them because you're not going to be able to clear them any other way, and all the other options result in you being swarmed and dying. And getting better at recognizing situations where you're not obviously forced to tank hits from enemies, but you actually should because of what's going to happen in 2 or 3 seconds if you don't, is one of the most complex skills in Brotato, I think. It's certainly something that takes a long time for me to realize. Playing Fisherman a lot recently, I have been playing waves with tons and tons of bait purchases early, and that teaches you situations where you need to tank a little bit pretty rapidly. Also worth noting that like if you have a lot of sustain, tanking has very little downsides. So sometimes you'll be playing a run and you just like have a lot of sustain, and so even if you don't have to tank damage, you might as well just decentralize to deal more damage, etc, etc, etc. All right, cool. Are those all in your brain now? Now I can play the game. I'm going to be playing Brawler. I'm going to be starting with Fist. I would not recommend trying to play hands with Brawler because they don't deal damage. It deals 1 damage and scales 50% with melee damage. It just, like, compared to Fist, it does basically no damage. It has 30 knockback on it. Hands are for other characters. They are not really for Brawler. I would recommend just playing Fist. You can also start with Claw. Claw's a little bit different. The reason that I don't start with Claw is that it also has Precise tag on it, and so I don't want my shops to be full of weapons that are precise instead of unarmed. That's basically the entire reason that I think it's better to start with Fist. All right, cool. Now we're playing Brawler. So right now I would say that I'm just centralizing and then walking to enemies to kill them, is how I would describe this movement and why this movement is happening. I want to take a little look around to see if trees spawn. So I want to be able to see the edges of the map to try to find my tree spawns. Actually got a crate out of the tree that spawned this time, and it has a beanie in it, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, mostly I'm centralizing when I can because it just lets me kill the enemies as quickly as possible, moving toward clumps of enemies as they spawn. I think I'll just take 5 materials here. I don't really know. I don't want to have a billion speed, I don't think. And we'll take harvesting. Harvesting's pretty good early. Generally speaking, getting a level 2 of harvesting is going to be great on pretty much every character unless they have something that makes harvesting not work for them. All right, so first shop, kind of same idea as with SMGs. We want to be rolling to get to 6 weapons. That's one of the best ways to improve our damage. We also want flat melee damage. That's the other really good way to improve our damage at this point in the run. Our character happens to have bonus attack speed with unarmed weapons built in, and so attack speed is particularly weak at this stage of the run for us because we already have a ton of it, and all of these types of damage multiply with each other rather than adding with each other. So you want to have, like, if you could have 20 points, you'd like to have 5 in flat melee damage, 5 in percent damage, 5 in crit chance, 5 in attack speed, instead of having, you know, 20 in flat melee damage or 20 in attack speed and not having them spread out. I'm pretty sure that's true. For certain numbers of, yeah, anyway. This is fine. We get 2 items and 2 weapons, and we can lock items if things seem particularly strong. But what exactly is particularly strong is always sort of the challenge in Brotato. I might actually just buy a bag. Let's just buy a bag. Is Broken Mouth particularly strong? Kind of. Gentle Alien's very strong. Gentle Alien's strong because it has 3 buffs on it. You might think plus 5% enemies is bad, but actually having more enemies gives you more money, which lets you scale faster than the enemies scale. So, weave 2. Again, I am just trying to stay central here and looking for enemies as they spawn. There are lots of, I talked about like strategic concepts of movement, but there are lots of tactical things in movement as well. Like, do you stay somewhere to wait until the material drops to pick it up so you'll have it for the store, or do you immediately run to more enemies to kill them, for example? Is a small thing that you might not think about, and it isn't really a strategic concept, it's more of a tactical concept. The difference between strategy and tactics being sort of like the size of the decision. You make lots of small tactical decisions constantly, whereas your strategic decisions are more like large concepts that you're applying over the course of the run. So we're wobbling a little bit here because we have these charging enemies. And I could just stay stationary and sidestep, but I want to have movement anyway, because I want to move toward enemies to kill them. Oh, I didn't get the tree. That's too bad. And so since I want to have movement anyway, the movement might as well wobble, and that way I'm getting 2 things out of my movement at the same time. 1, I'm increasing my damage by hitting enemies faster by moving toward them. 2, I'm making it basically impossible that the enemies who wind up and then charge at me are ever going to hit me, because I'm moving perpendicular to them in ways that will just make them miss all the time. Okay. I could take Goat Skull, it's kind of fine. It's kind of fine, why not? Flat melee damage is just very good. I'll take a defective steroids as well. I mean, exactly the same idea. Max HP is not bad either. Makes us a little bit more survivable. Alright, kiting those a little bit. That was a little sidestep. Go get the tree. This is tactical movement. We're giving up the center. Giving up, like, we now have a swarm of enemies that we have to punch through because we went to that tree, basically. There is a cost to getting trees. I think it's easy to have a heuristic, like I should always go to the tree when it spawns because it might have a crate in it, when in actuality sometimes you lose more by going to the tree than you're getting on average by going to it. So watch out for that. Let's take more flat melee damage. Melee damage is just good. Let's take more of it. All right. So now we have enough flat melee damage that we should probably be starting to think about taking other types of damage. I'm not going to reroll here because I'm only getting 3 slots in the shop, not 4, so it's a less valuable reroll, although it is pretty cheap. Given that I'm not rerolling, I could take a baby gecko. Having range is not bad on melee weapons. The way that melee weapons work with range is actually really interesting. They have an attack animation, and when they're out in their attack animation, anything they collide with, they'll deal damage to for the entire time that they're out in the attack animation. Which means that if the attack animation's really long, because you have lots and lots of range, it takes longer to do one attack, which you might think like, oh, I'm losing DPS. But the attack's out there for longer, so it will actually hit things more. Overall, whether that's increase or decrease in DPS depends on the situation. One thing that's nice about range is that we can hit things further away from us. That's always a nice thing about range. Sure, let's buy it. I don't think it's a huge deal either way. I think rerolling there is fine. I think just going into this wave with 50 materials stored is probably fine as well. All right, cool. Wave 5, we're centralizing here. We get a tree, nice. Sometimes the enemies take a little while to get to us. A little bit of sidestepping here. Lots of smooth blending between movement that's intended to dodge enemy attacks and movement that's intended to walk toward enemies to hit them. That was a little bit dodgy. I almost got hit there, and I was not intending to get hit. I tried to sidestep, but I didn't go perpendicular properly. Anyway, there's lots of very smooth and enjoyable and rewarding meshing of different priorities as you move in this game. It's really fun to play. I think I'll just take luck. I don't want engineering on this character for any particular reason right now, maybe later, but not at the moment. It would be unusual but possible for my build to end up caring about engineering later in the run. I could take more dodge. So the thing about dodge caps at 60% in this game, and because of the math on how dodge works, as you get closer to 60%, your effective hit points go up by more the more points you put in dodge. So there is a naive mathematical equation that says that the more dodge you have until you get to the cap, the more valuable another point of dodge is. A way to think about it that really simplifies it is going from 98 to 99% dodge doubles the amount of time on average that it takes you to die, right? Because you get hit 1% of the time instead of 2% of the time, so you're getting hit half the time. Whereas going from 1% to 2% dodge basically does nothing. You go from getting hit 99% of the time to 98% of the time, basically irrelevant. And that relationship remains true all the way through all of the percentages of dodge that you can have. So there's a very naive mathematical equation that implies that because I have 30% dodge, I should care about getting more of it more than I usually would. I find that practically speaking, though, dodge is not a very valuable stat for me. So I don't think I'm going to take it, basically. It's hard for me to explain. I think the reason for that is the variance in the value of dodge. I can have 50% dodge and take 3 hits to die, and I can die in 3 hits, and I will 1/8 of the time. So having all of that money invested in dodge has not made it so that I never die in 3 hits. Whereas defensive stats of other types can make it so I never die in 3 hits. And as you get better and better at navigating movement in the game, you do get more and more toward the point where you're like, I would like the ability to reliably tank 3 times in order to escape dangerous situations, but I don't need to think about increasing my effective HP in a mathematically optimal way as much as possible, because that's actually less valuable to me than guaranteeing that I can tank 3 hits in order to move in a safer way overall. Like, taking damage is sometimes safe because it puts you in a situation where you won't take any more damage, right? So, because of all of that, I just don't value dodge all that much in this game, and I'm not going to be taking it there. Let's take another Gentle Alien. I think taking Gentle Aliens, like, first off, I just think it's good. But secondly, I think it will hopefully lead to situations where the map is full of enemies and we can talk about more and more interesting types of movement. Here I'm just dealing enough damage that I can just beeline for those enemies and kill them. What should the nomenclature be for when you... It's like power washing, but only momentarily. I have a brief moment where it makes sense to run directly at the enemies without thinking of anything, but that doesn't last. I need a word for that. I'll think about it. Anyway, we're central, enemies are coming in, and we're just killing them. If you pay attention to my weapons, you can see that, like, not all of them are attacking at once. This is one of the things about being central, is that we can try to get more and more and more of them attacking at once by putting ourselves in situations where there are enemies all around us. And also, it takes less time to move to the next enemy group if you go from attacking one enemy group with your right fist to attacking the next with your left fist, because the distance between your right and left fist is covered by you changing weapons. I'm going to be taking armor. I really like armor as a defensive stat for all of the reasons that I don't like dodge as a defensive stat. I'm also going to take a wheelbarrow though, so goodbye to that armor. And I'm going to take a leather vest, so hello again to armor again. Leather vest is, oh wait, if I have dodge in a run, it's usually because I've bought several leather vests, but I'm mostly buying leather vests because I value the armor on them very, very highly. Generally speaking, I want to get to like 15 to 20 armor in a run, and the difference between having 15 to 20 armor and having 0 armor is very noticeable. Alright, I'm going to deliberately let this spawn because it gets me a little bit more materials on average to spawn it and then kill it than it would to kill it while it's an egg. And I'm strong enough to do it. On wave 7, it's the first time that we run into enemies which heal the other enemies. They're the ones that are running around with the bones in their mouth, so if I have a chance to kill one of those easily, I will definitely take it. A little bit of like kiting or maybe tethering to tank your enemies here, where I'm trying to walk to them and stay in damage range of them to prioritize killing them. Alright. I will take some HP regen. HP regen, in my opinion, is the best way to heal right now, especially on melee characters. I think that lifesteal is often stronger on ranged characters, but for melee characters, I would almost always prefer HP regen. Alright, just kind of buying items which I think are efficient as I roll through the stores there. We're not in a situation where any particular stat is miles and miles and miles better than other stats at the moment. And so at the moment, stores are more about efficiently spending our money. Man, so the reason I'm making this video is that I got woken up at 1 AM by fireworks. It's July 5th right now, the morning of July 5th. It's now 4:30 AM and I just heard another one. Like, what the hell, people? Okay, anyway. This is a situation where I'm kind of losing control. The enemy density is forcing me out of the center. I'm tanking a couple of hits, which I should not have tanked, where I just didn't dodge very well. Having to actually... So there I was losing damage to go heal. Which, like, you might think, oh, that's fine, you didn't die. But actually, that's really bad, because I left 30 or 40 enemies alive at the end of the wave, which could have been materials to let me grow stronger and spend more money. But I had to just run to the side of the map to pick up some healing and lost a bunch of damage that could have killed them. So yeah, that's pretty bad. I didn't die though, the run goes on, we're still doing fine. But worth pointing out that that is a thing that can happen. And that it is, like, there is a downside to it even if you don't die. Given that I have 36 dodge, I might as well buy Adrenaline. Adrenaline is fine. Adrenaline looks like it would make you invincible, but the problem is that enemies just hit you too hard unless you have a very, very, very large amount of armor for this to actually make you invincible. That said, I already have 4 armor. I can get some armor. Mastery is an incredibly powerful item on any character that cares about melee damage and doesn't care about range damage. Happy to have it. I could take a relatively cheap reroll here. I only have 10 luck. I don't think I'll bother. But that's a situation where, like, rerolling to see a shop for 20 is not that bad. It's a pretty cheap shop. Alright. Wave 9 is just swarms and swarms of enemies. We have 10% extra from our gentle aliens. And I'm just staying in the center of the map to deal damage as quickly as possible to them. Movement's pretty complex toward the end of this wave because these charging enemies start to spawn. So we have to think about dodging them. We also have to think about if we want to kill them, in which case we have to tether to them for a second because we won't just one-shot them. Or we have to hit them multiple times, try to get the trees. Getting the trees is actually more valuable at the end of the wave if I haven't gotten any loot crate drops yet, because getting loot crate drops decreases the chance that you'll get future loot crate drops. I was unlucky to not get one at all in that wave. Anyway, let's take 9 max HP. That seems like an easy level up, and 10 luck is fine. Generally speaking, like, I'm pretty happy to have 50 luck in a run. I don't generally get so much luck that all of a sudden I'm buying baby elephants or anything like that, but I do feel like the difference between 0 luck and 50 luck is very noticeable in terms of finding broken items toward the end of the game. I think Alienize is okay here. I don't think it's any more than okay. Yeah, I think I'll just roll for things that seem better. Lure should be better. I could also take a plant. Plant is an easy item to overlook. It's kind of unassuming, but it's very, very, very cheap. And if you don't want lifesteal and do want HP regen, like, the value on this item is incredibly high and you should buy it every time you see it, basically. Defective Steroids is getting a little bit worse, but I think it's still worth buying. It's getting worse because flat melee damage is going down in value as we get more of it, and attack speed is starting to be appealing again. Riposte. The damage on Riposte is always extremely disappointing. Like, I have 41% dodge and it says 100% chance to deal 99 damage to an enemy when dodging their attack, which sounds so good, but the reality is I just don't actually dodge that much. And plus 2 melee damage, like, last wave I bought a Mastery, which gave me plus 6 melee damage for 20 more materials than this. So it's not an efficient plus 2 melee damage. That said, I'm toward the end of my shop phase. Rerolls are starting to get really expensive. So you can think about the cost of this item as sort of being discounted heavily because I'm going to not reroll after I buy it. It's one way to think about it. I do think there's something to be said for seeing as many shops as you can to try to get the really, really strong items. Especially as you get toward like wave 9 and 10, you'll start to spawn red items and purple items will start to become even a little bit more common. Got a purple fist already, right? But I don't know. On the other hand, if you're spending a lot of money on rerolls, you're not spending that money on items, so if you're playing a situation where you think you're likely to win by buying a lot of white and blue items, then I think it's fine to just avoid rerolls and buy the moderately efficient items in the store. Whereas if you're playing in a situation where you feel like you're more likely to be winning with strong purples or getting a really strong red, then the value of rerolling goes up. I think for me personally, my goal is to be in situations where I can win with strong whites and blues without needing to get lucky and hit purples and reds. I do very regularly hit good purples. I think like the math just favors you very heavily, but also one of the reasons I hit very good purples is that I stay alive long enough to get to a point where you see purples in shops. If you don't stay alive that long, you are not going to. Alloy I think is actually quite bad here. The crit chance doesn't do anything. It's only 3 melee damage. None of the other types of damage are relevant to me, and I lose 6 dodge, which is actually a relevant stat. So usually I like Alloy. It's like, it can be a decent item, but it doesn't seem very good there. I'll buy a recycling machine. Just makes me some money as we go the rest of the way through the run. Any item with range damage on it has no value to me, so there will be lots of items I'm offered from crates, which I'm just going to recycle. We can't take metal. I will take metal, I think. I don't care about crit chance, so the minus crit chance on it doesn't matter. Baby with a beard, great example of an item that doesn't do anything for me because it scales off range damage. Buy another plant. I think one more reroll. Poisonous tonic is less good than usual. A little muscly dude's okay. I would like to start getting some attack speed now. I'm tempted to lock that, but I'm just going attack speed and damage percent from here basically because I have 43 flat melee damage. I'm upgrading my fists the rest of the way. All right, anyway, elite wave. We're tethering to this. There's tethering and one side step. Actually a very, very easy elite to kill once you understand how it moves. Cool. Well, that's dumb. Other than that, we're just going to centralize. So somebody asked me the other day in a stream whether elite waves had fewer enemy spawns, and I realized that I don't actually know. Does a wave having an elite on it cause there to be fewer other enemies? If I was asked a question on like a game show and I had to guess, I would say that you get the same number of enemies, even if there's an elite. Well, you get +1 enemy because there's also an elite, I suppose. That's kind of a fun little dodge. Here I'm just wobbling up and down in the middle of the map for all of the reasons that I've talked about wobbling. But yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if maybe you get fewer enemies total. We could take armor here. Or we can take damage percent. I think I'm dealing plenty of damage, so we can just take armor. So there's no reason you can't buy other melee weapons on this character. I'm just not really going to. Let's simplify the game down to just using fists. On my SMG video, a lot of people were like, not a lot of people, but several people were like, gee, only using one weapon seems like not a great recommendation for the game or something like that. And maybe I should have stressed better, like I was choosing to just win with SMGs to demonstrate a simple way to play the game. I wasn't saying that you have to only play with SMGs or even that during that run, there weren't times that I could have bought another weapon and benefited from it. In the SMG run, I just like wanted to simplify the game into other things I could talk about instead of like introducing you to like 18 different weapons, because there are tons of different weapons in this game. And the same thing is going on here. I don't want to have to talk about every single melee weapon every time I see a new melee weapon right now, so we're just going to use fists. Let's talk about the other stuff first. When we get to like arms dealer or something like that, we can talk about all the different weapons in the game maybe. I could take gnome, 10 melee damage. I think man, I don't know. It's okay, right? It's okay. I don't love the minus range. I would like to have a little bit more range than I have. I just feel like I have to get a bit too close to the enemies. We're in lots of situations where I'm losing damage because the fists on the other side of my character model from the enemies aren't attacking them. On the other hand, I have a lot of flat melee damage, so I punch really, really hard. Doesn't matter quite as much if you're losing damage if the enemies just instantly die. There's a small point to make here, kind of. So I saw that I was getting charged by the enemy that hit me just a little bit earlier, and I also saw that there was a consumable that would heal me, and I kind of just didn't bother dodging. I felt like, okay, perhaps it's just me being lazy, but also dodging there is inefficient movement in terms of like getting to enemies to kill them as fast as possible. And it was just like, okay, yeah, it's going to hit me, but I will immediately be at full health again, so the attack actually presents absolutely no threat to me. And so instead of thinking about dodging, I just thought about, well, how would I like to move my character here? On the other hand, if I didn't take damage, I wouldn't have had to pick up the healing consumable. So maybe it would have been better to like walk around it. I don't know. There are so many tiny things in this game. It is not an easy game to fully optimize Brotato. At this point, I'm kind of looking for HP regen and armor for survivability. And I'm looking for attack speed, I think, primarily for damage. I will take mastery just because it's so efficiently costed. Damage percent is also very good. I didn't want the minus max HP on the injection that I was offered just then is why I didn't buy it. A little bit more armor and max HP. All right, cool. Weave 13. I'm not sure I'm ever going to have to circle in this run. I was hoping that I would, but I'm kind of just really strong. Maybe I'll find a situation where it makes sense to just do it anyway. I'm having situations where I'm getting pushed out of the center by enemy spawns, but I'm strong enough to just walk through them back into the center. Which isn't always how it works. Definitely right now, the reason I felt like I had to make a presentation explaining dodging. Okay, now we're cornering actually. These tentacles are hard for me to deal with my build. I need a bit more range to actually close with them. They walk away from me. Now we're back in the center again now. I'm not gonna ever get those trees. They're too far away, I think. Can take some damage at the end of the wave just to deal more damage to enemies. I don't need a lumberjack shirt. I one-shot them anyway, I'm pretty sure. I think that melee movement is very, very complex, is why I felt like I needed to make a presentation about movement before playing a melee character, I guess. I think I already said that earlier in the video, though. It's hard to play and talk at the same time, especially, like, I'm not just memeing around or whatever, I'm actually trying pretty hard to explain things, which is, yeah, difficult while you're trying to read the screen and dodge everything at once. I'm going to take Schmoop here because I have 1 billion melee damage. I one-shot a lot of enemies. A small thing to consider is how much damage you deal mostly doesn't matter. What actually deals is how many hits it takes for an enemy to die. So if you're in a situation where like you one-shot almost every enemy and losing a bit of damage, you still one-shot almost every enemy. Losing a bit of damage doesn't actually do very much. This is a wave 14 horde. So I'm going to show you bracketing here. I'm pulling enemies away from the side of the map and then I'm walking up it. I'm waiting a little bit so that they'll get closer to me, and then I'm pulling them away from the side of the map and walking down it again. If I try to circle, the problem is that I walk into enemies in front of me all the time, whereas if I bracket, see how there's just like massive empty spaces because nothing was spawning there and I was killing the stuff there, and then anything that did spawn there has already joined the pack. So I got to show you a little bit of bracketing there. I did drop a ton of damage by doing that. That was not the correct thing to be doing in that wave. I was strong enough to be walking through things and killing them. But I just wanted to show you bracketing. And that was, I think, the best chance that we're going to get this run to show it off. I feel like it was very clear that they weren't dealing much damage to me. right? It's just a very, very safe way of moving. Very simple too. See if we can get into any situations where we find some seams, maybe that'd be fun. I think a little bit more defensively right now. Just because there are things shooting at me. I don't have that much armor. If I had more armor, I could move directly through the map with reckless abandon. But as you can see, I like actually take quite a lot of damage when I get hit still. Attack speed, I said that I wanted. There was also armor there, but the attack speed, I don't know. It spoke to me. It was blue. The armor was not. More attack speed. Alright, I like this. I feel like my damage just increased a lot, actually. Some damage percent? Yeah, I think so. We can handle bait as well. I think I'll take 10 luck. I would really like some more armor. None of this is armor. Probably too late for a Vigilante Ring. I have wave 16, 17, 18, 19. So it's 12% damage. It's actually like fine, I guess. Lock a fist. I would really like some armor because I am a little bit squishy for a brawler at this late in the game. Having to actually do some dodging. I would say that this is actually one of the more difficult brawler runs that I have played in memory. I was legitimately close to dying last wave and had to play defensively for most of it. Whereas I feel like the norm for me in brawler runs is to be playing very aggressively at this point, just because I have so much armor and health and sustain that I can. Looks like the attack speed has helped a lot, actually. It's less threatening to be in the middle of enemies now. Felt like I was over by the trees anyway, so easy enough to get them. It's kind of like a traveling salesman problem, almost, going on in this game while you're playing. I'll take 9 max HP, or will I roll for armor? Let's roll for armor. I think that's actually a lot more survivability than the HP would have been. This is even more armor. Okay, we're up to 14 armor now. I feel a bit better. Keep buying masteries. Mastery really is kind of our item. I wouldn't hate a banner. I like both of the positive stats and I don't care about the negative stat on it. So let's do it. I wonder, maybe the range that I got is actually a big contributor to things feeling easier. Oh, there's an elite here. Cool. This one is kiting and sidestepping. You have enough time to react to the attacks pretty easily. And then it does this weird thing where it just kind of runs away from you, but you can corner it, so then it just stands in a corner. I think you can probably wobble this. Maybe not. When you kill the elite, it drops a crate, and the crate gives you 100 health. So it's okay in a situation like that to take a little bit of damage in order to get the elite dead, because you will just immediately full heal afterwards. Gosh. These are hitting me pretty hard. Anyway, still fine. Explosive turret. I don't care. I think taking the explosive turret there is probably correct. I just don't care about flat melee damage anymore. Armor is great. I have so much flat melee damage. Just gets to a point where it's inefficient to be spending more on it. This is pretty good. Tons of armor. More HP regen. Another banner. Sure, why not? Alright. Now I actually have 50 range, so we've gone from minus 50 range to positive 50 range, and you'll be able to see the difference. I'm getting more attacks from my fists on the other side of my character model from the enemies. I'm getting to kill them from further away, which makes it easier to dodge and also just increases the speed of my damage. I think that generally speaking, in most of my melee builds, I want to have somewhere between 50 and 100 range. That's kind of what feels best. When you go above that, you start to be putting your attacks out such a long way that it feels like you're wasting damage a lot of the time. Like sometimes you'll one-shot an enemy in a certain direction and there's like nothing else over there to deal damage to you, but your fist is still out for another half a second. This becomes very improvisational. Like that wave's just pretty messy, so I'm just doing my best to dodge things. Sure, I'll take an alien eyes, why not? Did I take the first one? I don't even remember. It's kind of late. Let's take a bunch of max HP and 2 waves left. We're just finishing this up now. If I had not played the end of the run a tremendous number of times, I think I actually have enough armor to buy Stone Skin at this point. Stone Skin looked like it was awful to me the first time I saw it, but I buy it a lot more than I thought I was going to. Anyway, if I had not played this game a lot of times, I'd be concerned about the final wave right now, but the final wave boss fight is always the same, and I've just played it a lot of times. And this is the sort of game where there is a dexterity component. So it's not like Slay the Spire where, yeah, the heart fight's always the same, but there's a limit to how much you can do to trivialize that. In this game, there's really no limit to how much you can trivialize a fight by learning how to dodge it. So, having played the final fight as many times as I have at this point, it's just kind of free. Generally, am I thinking about it? So I'm trying to center here. I'm being forced out of the middle sometimes. Sometimes I'm leaving the middle to get a tree. As long as my weapon uptime is good, there's not too much cost to leave the middle to go get a tree for a bit. And what are we up to here? 26 armor. I'll just go ahead and take I think Improved Tools is better than Rip and Tear. Rip and Tear is very fancy, but most of the time I'm just attacking bosses, so they're not going to die anyway. Alright, cool. The final fight. So we're just tethering to this enemy. I am staying exactly as far away as my weapons attack as much as I possibly can. And understanding when it attacks me and trying to dodge its attacks when it attacks me. Although honestly I have enough health and armor that as long as they don't stand on top of the enemies, they can hit me with all of their attacks and I'll still win there. And that was Brawler. Cool. So hopefully that gave you a lot of introductory stuff to think about in terms of movement. I tried to set up some, I'll bring up the spreadsheet again. I tried to set up some kind of a simple framework to think about movement in, but then when I was actually in the run, you probably noticed that a lot of the time things are blending between different concepts. I'm blending between trying to get damage with my weapons and trying to dodge. I'm blending between trying to keep possibilities open and trying to play defensively and not get hit and stuff like that. There's a tremendous amount of stuff to do with how to move in this game. It's a lot of fun, and I would encourage you to think actively about it if you're enjoying playing the game, because there's a lot of stuff to think about. I had this up here and I don't think it was on the screen. I spent so much time building that. Oh well. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And I hope to see you next time for another run of Brotato. Next up in the order is Crazy, which is fun. And yeah, there's definitely some unique stuff that we could talk about with Crazy that we haven't talked about yet. So maybe I'll just keep going down the line for a little bit. Although Ranger, I think, would be almost identical to Well-Rounded. Maybe we'll skip Ranger. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, everybody.